In this, you will learn about high-level entity relationship diagram. Now, when we talk about ERD or entity relationship diagram, there is not much use in Dynamics 365 as compared to the custom build applications that you build from scratch. But you might need to create ERD in specific scenarios that we will discuss in this video. So let's first understand what is an ERD. It is the main component in designing database structure. So as you might know, for developing any application or software, you need to first create database structure, and then only other components like business logic, user interface, and integrations come into picture. So ERD is a very important component in developing an application. ERD shows how two entities relate or connect to each other. When you are building an application or any solution, you will have a database. So in that you will have multiple tables or structures, right? And there will be relationship. Then only you will be able to derive reports, you will be able to create transactions, and you need to define how these two tables or entities relate to each other. So ERD helps you get that information. In a typical entity relationship diagram, you can define these entities and connection between those using shapes and connectors. So you can define rectangles, which shows the entities, and also you can define connectors that basically connect two different entities, right? And also represent that how they are connected. They are connected in one-to-one relationship, one-to-many relationship, or many-to-many relationship. So we'll talk about relationship in the coming videos, how many records of one entity can be connected to another entity. It can be just one-to-one or one-to-many, or can be many-to-many scenario. In Dynamics 365 implementation and development, ERD can be very useful, especially when you are building new functionalities or creating integrated solutions. So when you are working with Dynamics 365, you are going to use customization module to build new entities, new fields. You are going to define relationships. So there is not much access to the database, like don't need to write SQL queries and those kind of things for creating and defining the structures, but there will be an interface, a user interface that you will use to build those integrations and functionalities. So as a strategy that we also follow in our projects is first ERD, then actual design and development. Because when you are building an application, you must first know how the application will look like, how the data will flow from one place to another, and also how different entities will connect and work together. So first we define ERD, and then only we go for designing and development of an application. This strategy can also help you identify relationships, derive scenarios, like there might be multiple scenarios that you will be building, and also find limitations of the design. So when you're building an application, you realize that, okay, you can have only this many records, or there is no scalability of this application. So you will be able to know when you have ERD defined, then based on that, you can make changes and make your application robust and scalable. And please note that ERD is not just helpful in creating, but also maintaining and managing features and functionalities. So let's talk about some of the important terms in ERD which you will be using, even if you're building a custom application or you're working with Dynamics 365. The first one is entity. So entity helps you model and manage business data. So you can consider them as the tables in a database. So in a Dynamics 365, we have CDS, Common Data Service. In that you have entities. So in those entities, you are basically managing business data. The next one is attributes. It holds a single value in an entity. These are also known as fields. So in case if you're working with previous versions of Dynamics 365, which are like CRM 2016 or 2015 or different previous versions, you will see developers use the term called attributes. So this is the same as the field in Dynamics 365 right now. The next one is the primary keys. So it uniquely identifies a record in an entity. Like for each table, you are going to store data, but how will you retrieve the data? Or how will you compare the data? So you need to have each record uniquely defined, right? So you create primary key to uniquely define each record so that you can easily retrieve it, easily do operations on that particular record. In Dynamics 365, it is GUID, which is randomly generated, and you don't see that in Dynamics 365. interface, but it is there in the backend to uniquely identify a record. The next one is relationship. It signifies how two entities relate to each other. So that's what we discussed. That's what ERD is all about. So in Dynamics 365, we have one-to-n. N means one to many, and n-to-n means many to many. You will also see something called n-to-one, which is similar to one-to-n, but seen from the related entity. So you can define these relationships. So a simple example can be a new bank account entity that has been created and how it relates to accounts entity. So in Dynamics 365, you already have an entity called accounts. It basically represents an organization or company that you work with, or can be your customer, can be your partner. So that is an account entity. And you create another entity called bank accounts based on your requirements. So how these two entities relate to each other? Here we have account entity, and in this account ID is the primary key, and then the new entity that we have created, which is called new underscore bank account. In this, the primary key is new bank account ID, which is like uniquely identify a record, and it also has an owner ID. It means who is the owner of this particular record, whatever records you will create in bank account. And it also has a relationship of a field of new account ID. So you have a one-to-n relationship between account and bank account. So it means that an account can have many bank accounts, right? It means a customer can have many bank accounts, and you can store that in Dynamics 365. This is just a simple example. Once you start working on a project, you will come to these scenarios and you will be able to relate much more. So make sure you check the resources where you will see something about metadata diagram tool, which you can use to generate diagrams. And in the resources, you will see an example also on how the entity relationship diagram looks like when you have actually defined it for a functionality. It will not be just two entities relate to each other, but there will be multiple entities, and there will be a relationship between them, one to n or many to many relationships. So that's it all about high level entity relationship diagram. I hope you get the basic overview of it, and I think that's something you must know for the exam, as well as for learning and building a new application, or even working with Dynamics 365 customizations. So that's it for this video, and I will see you in the next video tutorial.